Garry, it's great to see you today.
Thanks for inviting me.
So, Garry, we've known each other for a long time. And throughout that whole period of time that we've worked together, you've always said that Putin is a threat. And it's not limited to just the region. It's not just Ukraine in this case, but there's in fact a global war that Putin is waging. And your argument's quite persuasive. Why is it that you believe that?
The answer is very simple. I listened to Putin himself. Yeah, I always remind people that while dictators lie almost always about what they've done, but very often they are telling us exactly what they're going to do. I don't know what kind of psychological effect it is. Maybe they want to brag, maybe they want just to lay down the program, but just we can look at Mein Kampf, published in 1925. You can't blame Hitler for being secretive about his plans. It was a blueprint. Putin was not so specific, but clearly, he always tested the water before making next move. But almost all of his most drastic moves and decisions have been announced in advance. I don't think that he had these big plans back in 2000 when he won the first semi-fair elections in Russia. But as Yeltsin's successor, obviously he had no real opposition, and we'll remember how the numbers changed over the last few hours just to secure that he would be the winner in the first round of the vote. But his first act as Russian president was to restore Soviet anthem. And that's very important. Symbolism is one of the key elements of dictator's ideology. So that was a clear message that Putin had some ideas in his mind, not maybe, built as a program, was not yet Mein Kampf, but also you compare his decision to restore Soviet anthem and his famous public statement a year before, since he was still a prime minister, apparent Yeltsin heir, that once KGB, always KGB. There's no such a thing as former KGB agent, saying in front of his quote unquote former colleagues in the main hall of Lubyanka, the KGB headquarters. So you understand his mental setup. And that's why immediately after I saw him attacking the press and going after all the opposition, I published my first article about Putin and Putin's potential threat back in January 4, 2001 in the Wall Street Journal. And again, it was too early. I saw him as being a threat to democracy in Russia, but I could feel that it would not stop in Russia because, again, I read enough books on history, and also I grew up in the Soviet Union. And for me, again, this is the moment when I heard him on April 25th, 2005, addressing the joint session of Russian Duma and Russian Senate, and saying, quote unquote, the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. I knew it. I mean, it's for me, it was proof, more than sufficient to actually to draw a conclusion that Putin was ready to move beyond Russian geographical borders. And 2 years later, in Munich, he said it bluntly, just facing directly all the leaders of the free world, including Bush 43, and demanding that NATO would go back to 1997 borders. That's the ultimatum that Putin presented to Biden administration back in December 2021 as a condition not to attack Ukraine. So Putin's plans were quite clear, and also there's a logic, the logic of dictatorship, the one that he built in Russia, is that at one point he runs out of enemies inside the country, and dictator needs an agenda. An agenda is always, it's to prove his invincibility, him being irreplaceable, him being just the center of this universe, the spine of the system. And it requires proofs. And since democracy is no longer there, you don't have democratic institutions and tools to prove the legitimacy of the person who is now in charge of Russia, on top of power for more than 25 years. So it's always a show of force. Mm-hmm. And considering Russian imperial history, it's also important to remember. So you didn't have to be, it's Nostradamus to make a prediction. And his attack against the Republic of Georgia was the first test of water out of the states and the resolve of the free world. And it proved to Putin that he could actually prepare for something much bigger. And that's why in August 2008, I wrote another article in the Wall Street Journal saying Ukraine would be next. Again, it was not just educated guess. I mean, I knew it was a logical development, but again, it took time for Putin to actually recognize that the West would be too weak, and Syria was a very important test to convince Putin that America would not move. So I'm simply listening to Putin, and now I don't have to tell you that Putin's goal is to destroy Ukrainian statehood, and to erase Ukrainian nation. He has been saying that, and his propaganda keeps saying that. So it's not that we're trying to guess his intention. We had so many Putin's lobbyists, agents, sympathizers, and some of these classical, the tankies of the 60s saying, oh, we don't know, but Putin's goal was just, to minimize the threat to Russia. We have to, share the blame of expanding NATO to far to the east. It's not a debate. You simply listen to Putin and to his cronies and to his propaganda. They don't care about NATO. I mean, they care about Russia pushing, further to the west. It's not just to rebuild an empire, but basically to take revenge what Putin believes was a loss in World War III. It's now World War IV that Putin is running as his crusade against the world that is built on the wrong principles, according to Putin. It's compromises, consensus, treaties. No, might is right. That's the way Putin wants the world to operate. And again, he has been saying it many times. So that's why the war that is now happening in Ukraine is not a war that could be resolved at a negotiating table. This is the war where just it's either we win or we lose. And if we win, that means Putin must lose. Russia must be defeated, and Putin's regime must be destroyed, because this is the cause of the war. Putin's regime that made war not just against Ukraine. Ukraine is, according to Putin, I'm simply quoting it, is one of the targets, but it's like it's intermediate stop of their global crusade against the free world. So we have to win the war, and the war and winning means that the regime that made this aggression, it's a core of its existence, must be defeated and eventually destroyed.
I will say your book into
for this very long and emotional response to visually a very, very simple question, but unfortunately, again, this simple questions, require long answers, because it's unwillingness to be honest about Putin's intentions already caused hundreds of thousands of lives, millions of people misplaced, and the whole world is ablaze. And I believe that it's the center of this web is in Moscow. And as long as Putin can operate with, call it, benefits of the doubts and some wriggle room for diplomatic maneuver, our world will not the trend will not change.
So I was going to say that your book in 2015, Winter is Coming, does highlight almost all these points. And so I will say that book is an amazing reference because a decade has passed. And I remember talking to you when you're still writing the book, and it's amazing. Nothing has changed. It is exactly the same threat that we see playing out today. But I'd be curious.
No, Jason, it has changed. It's a war now. In 2015, the many reviews called me a warmonger, an Obama hater. And by the way, the book had a subtitle: Why Vladimir Putin and the Enemies of the Free World Must Be Stopped, which caused more friction with the publisher than the title itself. Yeah, because they thought it was Cold War, and my response was, yes, of course it's a Cold War, because winter is coming. Yeah, and back in 2015, there was still room for doubts, and many of my predictions, though we already had Ukraine, Crimea, annexation, war in Donbass, but it was not that global. But I saw that it would come, and And now it's amazing that now we're still having people today in 2025, people that are still trying to find some kind of, it's not a compromise, but they, it's they always, think that maybe we can negotiate our way out.
It is amazing. But a lot of people make the argument, and I know I know your response to this, but I'll ask you because I get this question a lot too. People say, but Putin is bad. We all can accept that. But how about if the next guy is even worse? And Russia's never had a democracy. Maybe it'll get even worse than it is today. Or they make the argument that, let's be honest, Russian history, even in the 90s, there was never really a hope to become democratic. It was going down this path since the Yeltsin era. And then he just chose Putin and it continued as it always had, dictatorship. But what do you think?
No, I don't think we have to apply such a deterministic view for Russian history. Yes, Russian history offers you very little ground for optimism about democracy finding its fertile soil in Russia. But it's again, it's nothing is so determined. I mean, you look around the world, just look at Korean Peninsula. So it's the same nation, and while the North Korea is one of the worst totalitarian regimes in the world, and by the way, working with Putin, I just read latest news that more North Korean troops are on the way to Russia to fight this Ukrainian war. Look in the south, the same people, very same people that were no different from their North Korean brothers and sisters in 1953, now build one of the most sophisticated democracies and market economies in the world. So there's always element. I wouldn't call it a luck, but some kind of this turning point in history. Yes, of course, Russian history is this. It's full of these imperial conquests, and a lot of Russians they still believe that somehow Russia has rights to it's the Russian speaking universe. It's yeah, there's so many myths that's poisoning the minds of ordinary Russians. But we had a chance, maybe a very small window of opportunity, 91, 92, maybe before Yeltsin demolished the parliament. I have to say I supported Yeltsin in this conflict, but I understand now that there's this 3-4 days of civil war in Russia in the center of Moscow, basically killed our only hope to move gradually in the right direction. And then the first Chechen war followed. It's typically for every authoritarian regime trying to stay in power, the small victorious war is looks like the best option. But of course it ends up with not one but many wars, and none of them are victorious at all. I think that this now we just have to recognize that it's in its current form and shape. Russia is beyond salvation. It's not easy for me to say. I still, I have my beliefs. I represent, I think millions of Russians, at least few millions, that think, along the same lines. But we are in absolute minority, and most of us are in exile. When you look at Russia today and the Putin it's more like Nazi Germany, 1943, 1944. But it's even with everything I'm saying now, you don't expect things to get worse after Putin. Let's just fantasize for a moment that von Stauffenberg and his co-conspirators succeeded in 1944, killing Hitler. Yeah, it's the whole idea that somebody could be worse than Hitler is preposterous. Putin is the center of the system. I already said it's spine. So if you take away the spine, so the whole system is crumbling. And you remember what's happened after Stalin's death? There was a kind of liberalization, because the moment dictator who is in power for so long goes, for whatever reason, let's say dies, it's not even considered the coup, which is, it's like, surgery. But let's say he simply dies. The system now needs to find a new balance. And before it finds a new balance, you have fight of the various groups. It's like, you replace one capo de tutti capi by several families, running this criminal business, but negotiating. The moment you move from one-man dictatorship into Politburo type, mafia type debate, so everything is getting less aggressive because it's negotiation. because some groups would like maybe negotiate with America, maybe even just see the way to end the war in Ukraine. It instead of certainty of the war, you go into uncertainty of some kind of criminal negotiations. So I'm not telling you Putin goes, democracy will flourish. No, absolutely not. But this is very important step towards the better outcome. It may not come. So it doesn't mean that if Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi they go out, so you have democracy next day. But it's a chance. It's an opportunity for Russia to actually change. I think that it still will require a much bigger shock. It's not just Putin goes. I don't think we should bet on biology. He's not that old, and it's not the best hope. The best hope for me is Ukraine winning the war, defeating Russia on the battlefield, and raising Ukrainian flag in Sevastopol. That's a kind of a shock, mental shock that Russian population requires to eradicate this imperial virus that is sitting there for hundreds of years. People should understand that empire is dead, and they're fighting for dead body. The idea of empire is too powerful, unfortunately. And as of today, Putin is succeeding because it looks like he's winning, or definitely not losing. And Russian history, if it's any guide, tells us that if regime is doing well in the war, no matter the cost is irrelevant. It's fine. The regime survives or even getting stronger. The moment the war goes south, it's Ori. It's not looking good, and of course ends up as a defeat, like Crimean War in mid 19th century, or Russo-Japanese War in 0409, 04, 05. That's the end, and people getting really angry, and it leads to some kind of social change or even revolution. So that's why I think the best we can hope for is to push for Ukraine to win, just to end all these useless conversations about how can we negotiate peace with Putin. There's no peace with Putin. It's the war will continue as long as Putin has resources to continue this war, and also to end fantasies about Russia surviving in its current geographical borders. It's an empire. It's a last empire on earth, and it must be dissolved. I think most of the Russia could stick together, but we should understand that there's a huge threat to future of Russia, and it's not from the west, but from the east. You have China that is not hiding its massive territorial claim. It's at the size of 3 times France, based on old treaties with Russian Empire, and Chinese claims that Russia, by the way, could be justified claim that Russia in 1860 took over these territories that's stretching from Vladivostok to Lake Baikal. And it will be difficult for Russia to stay together because, again, the glue that keeps together these various elements of Russian society and Russian state is a war now. It's the war is pouring in every hole in Russian society. So it feels every segment of that. So from the government and top businesses and elite to every kindergarten. And to end this hysteria, you have to show to people, to majority of people, that don't have time to think, just about some geopolitics. They have to be shown that it's over. And I think the only way to have this shock and to convince them that the choice for Russia is simple: either to beg for forgiveness and just try to find a way to reconcile with Europe, or to become Chinese satellite state. It's Ukrainian flag in Sevastopol.
So I've heard you make that argument before, but could you highlight that? Why is it that you believe that? Is there historic examples of where this is proven to be true? A major defeat like this or a major shock can change a country.
Look, again, as I said, we look at history and we analyze the wars. Let's take 200 years and see the outcome of the wars and its effect on Russian political and social life. So let's start with Napoleonic War. The war ended up with Russian triumph. Okay, it was a coalition, but everybody saw Russians as a crucial element of this coalition that defeated Napoleon. All the reforms that Alexander I have been playing with, they have been abandoned. So basically the victory in this Napoleonic War ended all the dreams of progressive Russian aristocracy about abandoning the serfdom. It led to the creation of the so-called Decabrist December movement, and a failed attempt to actually force these reforms in 1825. So that's it. Crimean War, 1853, 1856. Horrible defeat. I mean, defeat on Russian territory. Basically, Sevastopol was taken by the coalition of British, French, and Turkish, even some element of Turkish troops. So the outcome, a few years later, Alexander II introduced the most comprehensive liberal reforms ever in Russia. It's not just abolishing serfdom, but also introducing things like the jury and the legal reform. And it's massive reform. And if not for him to be killed by revolutionaries, by terrorists, so he was about to introduce the constitution. So that's one. Then we go to Russo-Japanese War. By the way, this is the Alexander III. His son was just very reactionary, and it's son of Alexander II, and he just stopped all those reforms. And what also helped is that the war against Turkey that Russia won in 1877-78 still carried by Alexander II, but it improved Russian image in Europe, and so they felt that they're too strong enough. Just forget about reforms. So the reforms have not been abandoned, but they more froze. And Nicholas II, Russo-Japanese War, disaster. Constitutional monarchy. That's the outcome. It was a revolution in Moscow. It failed, but the only way for regime to preserve itself was to introduce most amazing and it's unheard reform in Russia, constitutional monarchy. So 1905. So 1917. Stalemate and the World War at the front of the World War One. I mean, it still looked pretty good because the coalition was probably pushing Germans and Austro-Hungarians, but country was tired. The end of not just the regime, just the whole empire collapsed. World War II. It's called Great Patriotic War in Russia. Even today, the regime is still using it as like a parasite. It's using the war as a justification for its existence. And that's happened since Stalin. So yeah, of course we won the war. So the World War II. It's created a kind of the legitimacy for many regimes to follow, for many iterations of Soviet totalitarianism followed by Putin's dictatorship to basically live out of this legacy. They have nothing to do with that, of course, now, but it doesn't matter. It's all about we can repeat it. So that's what they say. So and that's why they call all Russian enemies fascists. Ironically, they play the role of Nazi Germany now, but everybody's fascist now because they want this connection. So we are fighting fascism, Ukrainian fascism. It doesn't matter. Zelensky is a Jew. Who cares? Fascist. So it's repetitive. Cold War, Afghanistan. Russia removed troops from Soviet Union, removed troops from Afghanistan without the same chaos and disaster as Americans from Saigon in 1975 or Americans in 2021 from Kabul. Russian troops walked, in good order. I remember General Gromov standing on the bridge on February 15th, 1989, receiving the troops, saluting them. And the Soviet Empire collapsed by the end of that year. It's 1989 across entire Eastern Europe, and 3 years later, Soviet Union ceased to exist. So it's all in Russian history. It's in the blood of Russian population. Again, the cost of the war. That's why some people say, "Oh, it's too costly for Putin." No, it doesn't matter. As long as he can pretend. He doesn't have to win the war. He can pretend of winning the war. And unfortunately, his propaganda is doing a good job. And it's hard to argue. They still control a good chunk of Ukraine. And they keep bombing Ukraine, killing more people. Again, who cares? They killed civilians. It doesn't matter. They killed enemies. So propaganda has been doing a great job. Also, this is Putin believes that he's he has been successfully weakening the opposition. And the opposition is not Ukrainians. By the way, ironically, we understand now that Putin's influence in Ukraine is much weaker, almost non-existent, because they fail to actually find or just to learn even the little piece of information about the Ukrainian most amazing Ukrainian intelligence operation. But if you look westward of Ukraine, you'll find out that every country, literally every country, has strong Russian. Some of them has not too strong, but a Russian lobby, politically, entrenched. In some countries, they are in power, like in Hungary and Slovakia. You have Putin's Trojan horses that are in the position to effectively block help to Ukraine or new packages of sanctions against Russia. But even in Poland, we have a small component, very small, of course. I have to say. In Romania, just miracle that stopped pro-Putin candidate winning presidential elections. In Germany, okay, we have two extremist parties, far right and far left. It's one third of the parliament now, at least, is of Bundestag, is in the hands of those who are openly, associated with Russia or directly funded by Russia. So Marine Le Pen in France, it's a long list. So and of course, even in America, in the current administration, we have a lot of people starting from the very top that, that always show a strange sympathy to Putin and Putin's actions. So that's the picture that average Russian, even educated Russian, can see every day, and they believe Putin is doing great. Yeah, the war, yes, but we're fighting the rest of the world. That's another problem. The free world failed to come up with a plan to show to Russians that are not in agreement with Putin that they can leave the country. They can just have a new life by cutting ties with Russia, but nowhere to go. Nobody wants Russia now, and I understand why. But the problem is, it's you left millions of potential allies in Russia just working for Putin because they have nowhere to go.
You've made the argument before that Putin is essentially a criminal regime. And PutinCon, the conference back in 2016, I think it was, in New York, where we were at, where it was very interesting. It was talking about how Vladimir Putin is the world's greatest terrorist, the world's greatest, and a host of other crimes, which is a new way of looking at his regime. Most people talk about it as political science, or, there's a strategy, or the Russian world. Now, two things then. Can you talk a little about the criminal regime of Putin, but also, do you think he really believes in this theories they put out, like the Russian world or Orthodox conservatism? Does he believe this, or does he just use it to convince his population, to manipulate them?
I don't think that Putin's education is sophisticated enough to talk about these concepts like social conservatism. Instinctively, he feels it's a good idea, but he's a KGB guy. Let's remember KGB. I mean, it's deep inside, and it's all about carrying this hybrid war. And part of this hybrid war is to weaken the resolve of the opponents by playing these various cards. And he found out that this card of so-called social conservatism is a very effective one. That's why it's not surprising to see the close cooperation between Dugin and Bannon, Alexander Dugin and Steve Bannon. So they found that's a lot in common. So and Putin, he may not know the details, but he can smell it's a good idea because it splits the free world. He doesn't create opportunities, but he knows how to use them. He's very good in grabbing the opportunities. So this is there, and also it's a very effective way of pushing his clandestine agenda. Instead of simply selling ideology, as Soviet Union did, which was not so effective because any ideology could be received. It's happened, but it could be also criticized because ideology is rigid, and Putin always looks for more flexible weapons. He is spreading doubts. That's why I always call him merchant of doubt. It's very effective. Yeah, we corrupt. Everybody's corrupt. Yeah, election is not fair here, but no one, can have a free and fair elections. So it's working. Billions and billions of dollars spent on this propaganda, and we could see results. A lot of people in America and in Europe, they losing, if not lost, faith in the values that we hold dear, and values that are fundamental for the success of our democracy. because it's the Putin propaganda worked. And again, it's not just working in a vacuum. They always find the weak spots. And the culture wars, perfect, fantastic. Let's get in. Every opportunity to split the Western society, just to have this, basically to widen the gap between different political groups. They have been using, and give them credit. They did it perfectly well. And that's why even the war in Ukraine, is, it's, you still hear voices that, if not directly defending Putin, but they trying to undermine the tragedy and magnitude of crimes against humanity committed by Putin.
Vladimir Putin and the people around him, especially the people around him, the senior leadership today, with whom he surrounds himself, Patrushev or Shoigu, whoever else it is, do these people, Dmitry Medvedev, actually, I want to specifically mention, because people ask about him a lot, do these people believe what they are saying, or it's just a tool, as you described? And what do you mean that this is a criminal regime? What's behind the criminality? Is there real criminality?
I don't know whether we should spend time debating what is criminality. Yeah, criminality is, again, stealing, wallet from someone's pocket is criminality. Killing 1 million people, poisoning them, it's, you may say, it's statistics. It's a war. Criminality is just, it's a total contempt for law, and believe that you and your tribe, your group, your state, your whatever is beyond the law, and you are the law. And that's Putin. So as for his entourage, his cronies, his henchmen, you name them, I don't know. It's just whether they believe in something or not. I mean, I don't think Dmitry Medvedev can believe in anything, except just the next bottle of vodka that is expecting him. That's because I can hardly imagine him being sober these days. But it doesn't matter. It's because they know that their success is within the system. They own the system. We had one moment, interesting moment in Russian history that could have changed it, but it didn't. It's a Prigozhin's revolt, because that was a moment where we saw that not everybody in Putin's entourage, in Putin's immediate surrounding, agreed with Putin. And I think, again, this is pure speculation. I have no inside information to prove it, but I think the main idea behind Prigozhin's revolt was his belief that the war would go just, would be bad for business. Again, it was nothing else but a debate between various groups within criminal empire, and the man who was not second in command, but he was close to Putin and strong enough to challenge the boss's assumption. I don't think he had ever intended to take over Moscow and overthrow Putin. It was basically an attempt to end the war, which he thought would be a disaster for their business. Because back then in May, June 2023, they expected Ukrainian counteroffensive operation to be very successful, since they didn't know that America would not provide Ukraine with enough weapons. So they couldn't even imagine that Biden administration would be limiting, just the supply of weapons to make sure that Ukraine would never have a decisive victory on the battlefield. But in May, June 2023, they didn't know, and Prigozhin tried, and that's why they negotiated, and it was like unresolved conflict. And people ask why he was so, naive just to attend, events and just travel, because he believed they had a deal, but he missed a moment where his position weakened, since the others, because it's not just necessarily Putin, others behind Putin who benefited from war directly, they saw, wow, we're winning. America is not abandoning Ukraine, but is not offering Ukraine what it needed. So it was an argument that Prigozhin lost, and was losing the argument within the mafia family debate. It's very often leads to you losing more an argument than your life. So Prigozhin lost, and has been eliminated. And today, the Putin's entourage and people surrounding Putin, they benefit from the war directly. That's why expecting any of them to go against him. No, there's no opposition to Putin, as we had, in Nazi Germany, the massive conspiracy of the generals and officers that saw that Germany was on the verge of collapse. They had to save it somehow by eliminating Hitler. No, this war. They believe that Russia is immune. There's no way that anybody will roll tanks in Moscow. That's not Berlin, 1945. So, and the war is good for business. Just look, I mean, they're all making money out of the war. And by the way, going back to Prigozhin's empire. It has been divided, and we know that Russians in Africa are very active. We just, it's nobody pays much attention because everybody talks about Gaza and Iran now. But if you just follow some news, local news, you will see the crimes against humanity committed almost on a daily basis in the Central Africa, stretching from Sudan all the way west to Mali and Senegal.
Absolutely the case. And you make an interesting point about Prigozhin, and I've said, and we've discussed before, is that I think that showed how weak the Putin regime really is. Not only did Prigozhin do this, but we noticed the military didn't stop Prigozhin, the intelligence service didn't stop Prigozhin, the police didn't stop Prigozhin, the National Guard didn't stop Prigozhin, the Chechens didn't stop Prigozhin. And what this all saw, and then when he was in the cities like Rostov, the people came to greet Prigozhin. They brought him food. They greeted him well. And all this shows, why didn't the military call on an airstrike if they knew where he was 100 kilometers away? Why didn't Medvedev say anything? Why didn't Kirill, the Patriarch of the Orthodox Church, say anything? Why was there silence? It's just nobody knew what was going to happen. Nobody was sure if Putin was still going to be the leader of the country in the near future. And I think that shows just how weak the Putin regime really is.
Yes, it's more likely, it shows some weakness of Putin. But again, it was a moment of uncertainty because Putin's regime, as any fascist dictatorship of that type, survives only when dictator looks invincible. He should be, it's beyond, not just any reproach, but beyond any attempt to challenge his divine authority. The war in Ukraine that Putin, the full scale invasion, not annexation of Crimea, but the full scale invasion that he launched in February 2022, I think somehow damaged this divine image. By spring 2023, by the way, Prigozhin tried to actually conduct the war more effectively. His original attack was not against Putin, but against Shoigu and Gerasimov, against the Russian generals that couldn't conduct it. They stole, too much. It was corruption. So he tried, and he failed. Okay, he took Bakhmut, but cost. I mean, again, Prigozhin was a typical mafia guy. That is, his view was, what the hell we're doing? We have great business in Central African Republic, in other places. So in Africa, let's go do business there. It's safe. We have Syria, by the way, still at that time controlled by Russians. So we have many just strongholds in the world. We have Venezuela is far away, but it's all our stretched empire, drugs, gold, uranium, all sorts of illegal trade. So it's business. Why we're killing our good guys? Just it's good soldiers in Ukraine for what? So, and it was a powerful argument because in late spring 2023, a lot of people scratch their heads saying, okay, now we couldn't beat Ukraine, so Ukraine just receiving more and more weapons. Again, if Americans would give them enough, and it was there, it's not that they fantasized. They knew that thousands of tanks collecting dust in the deserts of Nevada and Arizona. They knew that F-16s, that's basically would be just would be turned into metal scrap, but they could be sent to Ukraine. So they knew that they had enough missiles. So from their perspectives, it's just if America would offer Ukraine full military assistance, that would be disaster. And again, I don't know, but I would be very surprised if the idea to attack Russia from Kursk, I know it didn't occur, just to Ukrainians back in 2023. So that's another chance to go around Surovikin line and just simply just to destroy Russian defense without losing their best soldiers in frontal attacks. So it was great uncertainty, and Putin's position was shaky, and that's what that showed by the reaction of ordinary people, and also by total silence of the elite. There were few attempts to stop Prigozhin. They all failed because he had enough military competence to destroy it, and his avant-garde just almost reached Moscow. The whole story that they were stopped at Oka River and they were powerful force, come on, they were running out. So Moscow was there for grab. Prigozhin never wanted to grab it, so he wanted to negotiate negotiate the end of this war. And that's how it ended, just with kind of negotiation. Lukashenko jumped in, and it took about a month for elites to recognize that Putin was right. America is weak, the West is weak, and Ukraine is still for grab. And then that basically sealed Prigozhin's fate.
That did. So, may I ask you just one last question, and it touches exactly on what you just mentioned. So, you've seen that Ukraine is seeking a paradigm shift. Having a war of attrition with Russia doesn't work out well. It's historically how Russia wages wars, and Ukraine's got a much smaller population. And so now Ukraine is trying to take the war to Russia. It's carrying out attacks inside of Russia. And we see this as having an impact on the military because they have to reprioritize things, but also they're unprepared for it. And the population is quite surprised. You see how the military bloggers in Russia were shocked by the June 1st spiderweb attacks. So, overall, do you think this makes sense? Do you think that this really could be a bold new strategy that could help Ukraine? And what do you think the impact will be within Russia?
No, I'm not. I'm not here to offer military advice. So I know what are the limits of my competence, where it ends. But analyzing what you said from the common sense point of view, yeah, I mean, Ukraine has to uh, respond asymmetrically. It cannot win the war on the battlefield, though it inflicts huge damages, losses. But these losses, Putin still can replace them. Is this since Russian economy is a war economy? So working for war or fighting, Ukraine it's still best option for many people from the countryside, and it's mobilizing another few hundred thousand is not yet a problem for Putin. I don't know again. Maybe it's becoming too expensive because we see the prices going up, and Russian economy is showing it's overheating. There are many indications that demonstrate that he cannot go in this war indefinitely. Some say 2 years, some say year and a half. But we are already talking about this is the numbers that are not 5, 10 years. No, it's there. I mean, it's NATO, I think latest 2027. So I think this we're there, maybe even less. Because the problem with this regime is that you don't have the correct statistics. So you don't know what is the level of resilience of the system, economically, financially, and also psychologically. Now, speaking about psychology, Ukrainians attack definitely played their role, because all of a sudden, the Russians recognize that it's Ukrainian drones also can fly in. Now the question is, can Ukraine send not just drones but long range missiles? I think if Ukraine has developed, as been announced, had developed the long range missile, I think Sapsan called it. That's what I read in the press. And if it really can hit Russian heartland, that may be the game changer, because again it's about recognizing that the war goes, just again is either good or bad. And Ukrainian missiles landing somewhere, just in Russian cities, it's not going to help Russians to it will not extend their confidence in Putin. So but I still believe it's not enough. It will help, but it's very important that that the Ukraine will be assisted by the free world to win the war, and winning the war means liberation of all Ukrainian lands. If we want to rebuild the world order, that is based on these fundamental values that are crucial for success of civilized world. So restoring Ukrainian territorial integrity is paramount, and it's not kind of a fantasy, because we hear so often this war has no military solution. Hell, there's no other solution but military solution, for a very simple reason. Because when you look at Putin or at Iran, for instance, if your enemy believes that military solution is the only one, no matter what you say, this is true. I mean, military solution is the only one because Putin believes so. That's why your response to this claim is yes, military solution is the only way to end this war. And sooner the Europeans and Americans, but this time Europeans, will stop, just repeating this mantra, no military solution. So better the chances for us to actually start working for Ukraine victory. Just, I'm waiting for this 3.5 years, waiting for the moment when a legitimate Western leader would say Ukraine must win, which means Russia must lose. The moment we hear it, so we'll know the outcome. because even with all this North Korean help and this is and even China behind the curtain, just pulling all the strings with all this, shadow expert and shadow fleet, is Russia is vulnerable. It's really vulnerable, and it's if the West, the free world, wants Ukraine to win, there are many ways. There are many ways to impose damages on Russia, the cost that even Putin cannot bear.
Absolutely the case. Garry, it was really great talking with you today.
Thank you. So I hope that next time while we talk, we have some good news from the battlefield.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Garry.